Using eggs to fix a Formula One car. You're about to hear some incredible stories. The 10 worst Formula One teams in history. They are not the ones that I'm going to talk about. Not at all. I'm going to tell you about 10 crazy teams. Teams with no money, teams that made tons of mistakes, teams that had no success, there will be no wins, no world titles. Okay, but so these are the 10 worst Formula One teams in history, right? I can't say that, because these are 10 stories of courage, passion, adventure. They ended up badly, okay? But they are the symbol of passion. And so even if they were bad, I can't not admire them. So we have dived down deep in Formula One history and found the 10 most absurd Formula One teams in Formula One history. At the position number 10, we have the Modena team. The Modena team was born around an engine, and not just any engine. I'm talking about a 12-cylinder Lamborghini engine. In the late 80s, Mauro Forghieri, a historical figure in Ferrari, when he was far from Maranello, has been approached by Lamborghini in order to set up Lamborghini Engineering, a kind of special department. Forghieri's team was small but very competent, and so they took out a gem, a 12-cylinder Formula One engine to be sold to the customers. And that engine was so good that in 1993 McLaren tested it with Ayrton Senna, evaluating it for the following season. In the meantime, however, Forghieri's team also studied an entire Formula One car. He has designed it, built it, and even took it on track. Okay, but how? With what money? Well, he did that thanks to a lot of Mexican pesos. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Those money came from Mexico, from a small, shady group of entrepreneurs, which you probably don't want to know more about, but the good thing is that they had money and they always paid as promised. Too bad that in the late 1990s, the Mexican government changed, and so these investors disappeared. The car, however, was built and it was ready to debut in 1991. And so, what did they do? Forghieri contacted some Italian entrepreneurs, and together they founded the Modena team. And that car was actually good. They had some interesting solutions. Something like zero side pods like Mercedes 2022 Formula One. And you know what? That car was fast. Nicola Larini at the debut ended 7th in Phoenix, while Van der Poel is 5th in Imola, until in the last corner he runs out of fuel. Holy crap, that car was about to score points. And so, what happened? They simply ran out of money in the mid-1991. The Modena team was forced to finish that season in order to avoid paying a fine to the FIA, but then they were forced to close forever. In position number 9, we find Forti Corse, another Italian team. The team was a dream of Guido Forti, an F3 and F3000 team owner. Guido Forti dreams of Formula One and decides to start an adventure for 1995. The engineer in charge of designing the car was Sergio Rinland, an Argentine guy working in Los Angeles for Dan Gurney. Have you ever heard of Dan Gurney? I made a video in the Italian channel. He was one of the most important men in motorsport history, the man behind the split between IndyCar and kart. Whatever, Rinland works on the project for Forti in the evening, taking a lot of inspirations from all calculations, and eventually comes up with a pretty good car. In 1995, the Forti finishes 10th in Monaco, 9th in Monza, and 7th in Adelaide. Nowadays, that would have meant points, but back in the days, only the first 6 used to score points. Much of the money that kept the team going came from the Brazilian driver Pedro Diniz and his Parmalat sponsorship. Parmalat was an Italian milk company that had some pretty bad problems 20-30 years ago. And so, what happened? That when Diniz left the team ran out of money. Yeah, and well, Guido Forti was a bit screwed by Pedro Diniz because for him a handshake was enough. They didn't make a contract. And so Diniz was free to leave the team without penalties. The 1996 car had a great potential, but the money were gone in the mid-season and the team was forced to close. Position number 8, we stay in the same period of time, but we move to England for a very similar story. Keith Wiggins has a small team that races in small classes, which is called Pacific. He too decides to take the Formula One adventure in 1994. So he decided to go to Reynard, an excellent chassis builder at the time, and Reynard sells him a sort of draft of a Formula 1 project, something to be evolved. The crazy thing is that that same draft had been sold to Benetton, which developed it and won the 1994 and 1995 Formula 1 World Championship with Michael Schumacher. However, this was not the case of Pacific, which has very little money, and in 1994 does not see the finish line, not even once. The 1995 car, however, was a bit better, because the team buys the facilities of the bankrupt Lotus. And in the last two races of 1995, they finished 9th and 8th. No points, though, and guess what? No money. Results? The Pacific closes in 1995. At the number 7, we find the HRT, the Hispanian racing team, which is a team that, depending on your age, you probably saw racing in your lifetime, since it raced from 2010 to 2012 and it was one of the 3 teams selected by the FIA to join the Formula 1. The FIA, because of a series of political squabbles with the big teams, was imagining a very different Formula 1, something with budget cap, guaranteed customer engines, aerodynamics advantages for the small teams, and so these 3 new teams based their business plan on this model. However, in the end, the FIA made peace with the big teams, and the HRT ended up with a budget which was 1/10 of Ferrari. The result? A disaster, of course. There were a lot of ownership changes, the partnership with the Lola lasted a few months, 0 points in 3 years, and one only notable episode with Daniel Ricciardo making his debut with that car. At the number 6, we find the Euro Brun. Until now, in this top 10, we've seen many teams coming from small racing classes, and this is the same story of the Euro Brun, which was born from the merger of Giampaolo Pavanello's Euro Racing, based in Senago, a city close to Milano, the city which is like 30 kilometers from where I live now, and Walters Braun Motorsports, a Swiss team that was racing Porsche in prototypes Group C. The adventure lasts 3 years, from 1988 to 1990, and the first year was the best. Many qualifiers, an 11th place. In short, the foundations seem to be there. Too bad that then comes 1989. In 1989, there are so many teams in Formula 1 that pre-qualifyings are needed. I don't know if you know what pre-qualifying is, but we can say that it's a little round of hell. The worst teams compete on Friday morning with dirty track just to try and get a place for qualifying. If you qualify, you can take part to the racing weekend. Otherwise, you go home on Friday. In short, that was a real nightmare. And Euro Brun lived that nightmare to the fullest. In 1989, they did not qualify, not even once. Always on a plane back home on Friday morning. In 1990, the situation improves just a bit slightly, thanks in part to a Brazilian driver named Roberto Moreno. He was a wizard of the pre-qualifyings, but by now the team has the hours counted. In fact, in the end of the season, they don't show up for the expensive trip to Japan and Australia, and they decided to close. We get now to the top 5, and in 5th position we find Coloni. So many Italian teams. We were really crazy. Coloni is the first and only Umbrian team in Formula 1 history. Umbrian means that it comes from Umbria, which is a region in Italy, which is the same region of my former Euro NASCAR team. Again, back to Coloni, we're talking about a successful team in the small Formula racing, which at some point decides to do the big jump in Formula 1. This desire comes from the passion of one man, Enzo Coloni. The debut came at the end of 1987, after a shakedown in Magione, an Italian track where I will be racing this year. You will see the races in this channel. And in 1988, the team relied on Gabriele Tarquini, a great driver. Tarquini gets an 8th place in Montreal, stuff that nowadays give you points, but not back in the day because, again, only the first 6 scored points. Unfortunately, from 1989 starts an endless nightmare. The new car is not bad, it's fast on a single lap, but the gearbox always breaks. And in 1990, money is tight, and in 1990, Subaru comes with an engine that is among the worst in Formula 1 history. That engine used to take 20 kilograms of oil for one race. And even in 1991, the performance was a disaster. The result is one of the worst series in Formula 1 history. From 1989 to 1991, 3 seasons without seeing a single checker flag. with the 1990-1991 seasons without even qualifying once. Sadly, Enzo Coloni adventure in Formula 1 ends here. At the number 4, we find another Italian team, Andrea Moda, and I am sure that most of you know the story of Andrea Moda. It is the king of shambolic Formula 1 teams. It applies in Italy as well as abroad. If you say Andrea Moda, many people smile. Yet, even in Andrea Moda's story, there is a lot of passion and many adventures. The story, very briefly, is this. Andrea Sassetti is a young man from the Marche region. Yes, another Italian region, beautiful, you should visit it. And Andrea is winning a lot of money on poker. Yes, poker. So he decides to reinvest those money in a shoe factory, as there are many shoe factories in Marche. So Andrea Moda is born. If you don't know it, Moda means fashion in Italian. And that company was very successful. So when Coloni fails, Andrea Sassetti is one of the entrepreneurs that takes over the team. And Sassetti decided to buy it all, including the cars. However, in Formula 1, he was not allowed to race with Coloni's car, because the intellectual property of those cars was not his. So he decided to turn to Simtech, a British company, which recycles an ex-BMW design. So within months, the team is ready to race the 1992 season. Ready... I mean, too little money and too few skills on 2 cars. You can imagine what happened. Just think that in some races, the mechanics working on those cars were the same people that used to work on the shoe factory. And guess what? The car always breaks. Then, what always happens in these cases, money starts to run out, and the Andrea Moda is opposed. Lots of bad rumors goes around Andrea Sassetti, who even gets arrested in Spa for tax complaints. But the charges in the end fell down. Eventually, listen to this, Bernie Eccleston bans the Andrea Moda team from entering the paddock in Monza, the home race. So that means the end of Andrea Moda. We are now in top 3 with the Life. Life is one of the slowest Formula 1 cars ever seen on track. Let me tell you the story. In 1987, Ernesto Vita's family has a business based in Fiorano. Does it say something to you? Fiorano? Ferrari? The Vita's family is friend with Enzo Ferrari. Good neighborly relations, and Enzo Vita has a big dream. He wants to build a Formula 1 engine. So he tells it to Enzo Ferrari, and Enzo refers him to Franco Rocchi, an historic engineer now retired. Rocchi agrees to design a Formula 1 engine, but on one condition. That engine must be a W12. W12? You mean V12, right? No, I mean W12. W, or radial engines, are engines with a particular configuration, something typical of the 1930s aircrafts. The design is complicated and difficult to design, but it has one great advantage, which is the size, which is small, especially in length. And this is great for Formula 1. Size is so important. So when the W12 engine comes to the dyno, it always breaks. Yeah. Not only it has 200 horsepower less than expected. But anyway, they don't want to stop. So Ernesto Vita decides to try and attract sponsors. And so he decides to set up a whole team called Life. The car is ready to debut in 1990, but guess what? It was a total flop. One legend after another was born about how slow that car was. And in Monaco, that car was 2 seconds per lap slower than a Formula 3. Before long, it becomes clear that the life adventure in Formula 1 will not have an happy ending, even with a different engine. By the way, do you want to know what was the problem with that engine? Listen to this because this drives me crazy. The connecting rod manufacturer, which was an outside company, decided to modify engineer Rocchi's design without telling nobody, thinking that they could optimize it. And you know what? When at some point somebody decided to put the original connecting rods as designed by Rocchi, the engine stopped braking. That's just incredible. Position number 2, we have Lola. Yes, because actually a Formula 1 car slower than life existed. I'm talking about the Lola T9730, 1997 season. Lola is a single-seater manufacturer, even a successful one. Kind of like Dallara today. Okay, maybe not at the level of Dallara, but in short, we're talking about a company that won everywhere. The founder of Lola is Eric Broadley. He feels this is the right time to have its own team, after having spent decades selling chassis to other teams. So the goal is set. Lola will debut in Formula 1 in 1998. The Lola name was so good that big sponsors arrived. Big names like Pennzoil and MasterCard, which was the team main sponsor. It was MasterCard itself that insisted on one important detail. A detail that will change everything. That team was set to debut immediately in 1997. The car was built in a hurry. No time for wind tunnel tests, no time to design the car properly. It has to be ready no matter what. Guess what? It ended up badly. In Melbourne, in qualifying, the fastest of the Lola was 11.6 seconds from the pole position. Much lower than 107% of the pole, which meant the exclusion from the starting grid. That performance was so bad, and the publicity to MasterCard was so bad, that MasterCard immediately withdrew the sponsorship, and so the team found itself without money. Did not participate to the race in Brazil, went bankrupt, and Lola company itself went into serious financial problems. And that was one very sad page for one of the most important companies in motorsports. We get now to the position number 1, where we find the Bellasi. How many Italians team, guys? This is the most romantic and crazy story of all. Late 1960, Novara, Italy. Guglielmo Bellasi is a Swiss-Italian entrepreneur and modeling enthusiast who makes single-seaters for the junior series in his workshop, even with a fair amount of success. One day, he is contacted by a friend who tells him, listen, in Switzerland there is a driver named Silvio Moser. He wants to race in Formula 1, he owns the money for a small program and an old Brabham car to take parts from, so do you want to complete the car? Especially the chassis? Of course, why not? Bellasi is ready for it. With a lot of passion and a lot of craftsmanship, a single-seater is built. They are ready to race as early as in Zandvoort in 1970. Well, you just built a Formula 1 car, you need to do at least a shakedown, preferably a complete test. But before that, you need to make a dyno setup. The problem is that Bellasi doesn't have a dyno for the setup. But there is another workshop in Novara which does. So, what did he do? He strapped the Formula 1 car to a road BMW and they towed it to the streets of Novara straight to the workshop. They do the setup, they load the car on a truck, and they go for Zandvoort. But before getting to Zandvoort, they decide to stop at Hockenheim to do one shakedown. Too bad the truck breaks on the road and they arrive late to the test. So the circuit manager tells to Bellasi, okay, you can drive, but at the end of the day, in the darkness, in the middle of the forest. Do you remember the old Hockenheim ring? The forest? So, what does the little team decide to do? They take an Alfa Romeo road car with high beams on, they put it on track with the Formula 1, and so Moser with the Formula 1 overtakes the Alfa, continues as long as he can see the road, then he stops. He waits for the Alfa overtakes him, light up the road, and then he starts again. That was pure madness, and that was their first test on track. Guess what? In the first races, including Zandvoort, the car struggled a lot, between breakdowns and little development. However, finally in Austria they can start. They were capable of qualifying. On the way to the circuit, however, the car with the Formula 1 car had an accident, and so the Formula 1 car broke the radiator. They didn't have the spare part, they didn't have the replacements, and they were about to make a Formula 1 race. So, what to do? An Italian mechanic suggests taking 12 eggs, he probably was used to prepare tagliatelle at home, separating the whites from the red, and using the whites as a solidifying agent in order to close the radiator. It was going to leave shortly, but at least the car was able to run. Sad, Done, the Bellasi completed 13 laps in a Formula 1 race with the radiator fixed with eggs, after which it finally broke and the car retired. The rest of Bellasi's story is between more races without satisfaction, a bit of a hill climb, and finally a well-deserved retirement. Meanwhile, the family has become a little gem of carbon manufacturing, but the magic of a Formula 1 car fixed with eggs, it's just something that I can't take off my mind.